Thank you for joining us, Tess. Tess is a traditional acupuncturist based in St. John's Wood. She studied acupuncture at the Confucius Institute of Traditional Chinese Medicine within the London South Bank University and trained at the first affiliated hospital of Heilongjiang University of Chinese Medicine in Harbin and China. So a big welcome to you, Tessa. The title of her talk today is From Evil Wind to Modern Qi. Is that how? Qi? Kai?
Qi, modern Qi.
A brief history of Chinese medicine. So over to you, Tess. Thank you.
Thank you, Sally, and thank you, Carl, for both of you organizing this. And thank you to everyone for being here today. I'm just going to start sharing my screen. So bear with me one moment. And I hope you can see the yellow emperor in front of you. So first of all, I'd just like to start with a disclaimer. I'm not a historian. As Sally had mentioned, I'm a traditional acupuncturist. My interest in the history of Chinese medicine is very much rooted in the fact that because Chinese medicine is so fundamentally different to Western or conventional medicine, that I think it's worth trying to understand, getting into the minds of the ancient Chinese doctors. What were they thinking of, the worldview, when the concepts in Chinese medicine started 2,500, 3,000 years ago. So that's where I'm coming from, trying to appreciate and understand more deeply what they were thinking of at that time. Just very briefly, I lived in Hong Kong for a while in the late 90s, early 2000s, and there, while living there, began to have a real appreciation for how Chinese medicine and Western medicine stood side by side and complemented each other. And that was the start of my interest in Chinese medicine. For the next 55 minutes or so, I'm going to be covering the different eras in history of China, starting from the mythological beginnings to current modern day China and the spread of Chinese medicine around the world. And my goal is simple, it's just to show you how sophisticated this ancient medicine is, and to give you an appreciation of how the principles I use in clinic today, the theories, the principles go back more than 2 millennia. Just a note, some people like to take notes to help them process and remember information. That's great. Some of you, including myself, might not like doing that. They just want to sit back and listen, have a cup of tea and listen. In that case, I've put together a couple of, or 3 pages of notes at the very end. So you don't need to necessarily take down notes or jot down anything. And I have a summary at the end. And also, I'm going to break up once or twice during the talk to ask if anybody has any questions, just to get a bit more of a flow so you don't have to wait until the very end to ask anything. Right, let's begin. As I said, the documented history of Chinese medicine goes back 2,500 years. That's just what we have literature on. And so here you see a court physician feeling the pulses of his patient, somebody obviously in the upper classes. And the pulses, the way we feel pulses is a very different to what nurses and doctors do. It's very much a diagnostic tool, of a way of looking inside the internal organs inside the body. So we've gone from here to here, where Chinese medicine particularly acupuncture, is widely practiced around the world. In the UK, it's probably the most popular complementary medicine or therapy, with about 2.3 million traditional acupuncture treatments carried out every year. A lot of people think that acupuncture is just a placebo effect, which is why it works so well on pain. Actually, there is such a large body of evidence showing that it works very, very well. It's very effective for a number of different conditions, not just pain, that you can't say it's just a placebo effect anymore. There is a 2017 very large study done by the Australian Acupuncturists and Chinese Medicine Association, looking at 117 conditions. And they found that for 8 of them, there was very strong evidence supporting effectiveness of acupuncture. 38 conditions where there was moderate evidence, and 71 conditions where there is weak or unclear evidence. So, and it's not just for pain, it's for a wide variety, looking at systematic reviews, which are the sort of the highest form of evidence for these sorts of research. Anyway, I don't know how much you know about Chinese medicine, but it's actually not just one thing. It's a body of different modalities. So acupuncture we see on the top left, where you insert very fine needles into different points in the body, and that creates physiological changes. We also use herbs at the bottom, underneath the needles. And I'm not a herbalist. I need 2 or 3 more years of postgraduate studies to do that. But herbs is very much part of the Chinese medicine world. And for things like gynecology and dermatology particularly, herbs are king. There's something called cupping. If you see the glass cups on the top of this page, glass cupping, or sometimes it's also made of plastic, quite often is used for pain, musculoskeletal pain, and you apply them, usually the back, and that really helps in those cases. There's also something called massage, tuina, which is a medical massage using principles of Chinese medicine. And the gentleman in the black and white photo doing Tai Chi, the internal exercises such as Tai Chi and Qigong are very much part of the Chinese medicine world because it's preventative medicine. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But these internal exercises very much is used in a medical sense. But we start with the mythological beginnings, where we have no documentation. And this is where I start, the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors era. And I'm going to start by talking about the person depicted here, the Yellow Emperor, Wang Di. He's one of the 3 sovereigns. And the most famous writing in Chinese medicine is called the Yellow Emperor's Classic of Internal Medicine. And I have a couple of different versions, all Chinese medicine people required reading. And Huang Di, yellow, Huang Di is emperor or lord. And Huang Di, the yellow emperor, is said to be one of the 3 sovereigns. And he gave the Chinese people medicine. Shennong on top is the god of agriculture, and he was said to have given or gifted the Chinese people with herbs, herbal medicine. And Fu Shi on the right is the god of fishing and hunting. So in the mythology, he was said to have, these 3 have given the Chinese people lots of great things. But we move forward to Shang Dynasty, 1,000 years before Christ. And this dynasty arose along the Yellow River. And on the map, the area in yellow, light yellow, would be present-day China. And the area in dark yellow is where the Shang Dynasty, the area it occupied. It was an agricultural economy, also had animal husbandry, but it was also advanced in some ways. So for example, they were known for casting bronze, use of chariots, for example. So it was considered the Bronze Age of China. And what we know during that time came from what we call oracle bones. So these are, they didn't have paper yet, papyrus or paper, but we found, or archaeologists have found, bones from animals like tortoiseshells or the tortoise carapace, and also the shoulder blades of oxen, inscriptions in them, which gave us very good information about wide range of subjects, not just medicine, but religion, politics, health, astronomy. So this is the first Chinese state for which we have clear written records. At that time, their worldview was very much that the dead and the living influenced each other and were dependent on each other. We know that of the upper classes for which we have documentation. You held sacrificial feasts to honor your ancestors. So this is where the worship of ancestors started. And we have vessels where you see the inscriptions of which family groups were making the offering and to whom they were offering, the ancestors they were offering. And at that time, when someone got sick, people thought that the cause of disease was because your ancestors cursed you. You didn't do something to appease them. Also could be evil wind, which I know has unpleasant connotations, but malignant wind. Think of typhoons and very, very strong weather systems, or snow sometimes. But of all of these, it was the curse of the ancestors that was considered the most important. And because of that, you had mediators, shamans, as depicted in this tablet, that mediated between heaven, where the ancestors lived, and humans. To this day, Chinese people still worship ancestors. This tradition, practice is still done today. And this is an example of a festival called Qing Ming, which is held in spring, normally April 4th or April 5th. And that's where families come to the grave sites. They sweep away the tombs and have lots of offerings. Very social affair, as you can see. Huang Di, the Di, which is means emperor, can also mean not just the earthly emperor, but it could also mean the supreme or the divine ancestor. So it has that connotation of someone in heaven who provided the living with things like good harvest or success in battle. And the king, the earthly king, was thought to have a special connection with the supreme ancestor. I'm going to fast forward to the Zhou Dynasty, which was a feudal society. And here there was a shift from worship of your Di, worship of the ancestors, to concept of Tian, which is heaven. Tian is the same character as in Tiananmen Square. And it's very much about well, the link between the king on earth and the ruler of the dead in heaven, that's weakened. And now you have this concept of rulers only having the right to become rulers, to remain rulers, as long as they were in harmony with heaven, with Tian. So if you were a poor ruler or if you were a despot, it meant you could lose the mandate of heaven. And this is something very much that still permeates current day rulers in China, where someone like Xi Jinping still has to prove that he's a good ruler. Zhou Dynasty was a period where there were constant wars. Central power was very weak. But at the same time, there arose 100 schools of thought. That's what they called this period, where you had loads of different schools of thinking, from Confucianism, legalism, school of Yin Yang, all sorts of different schools of philosophies. And of these, 3 of them had the most impact on Chinese medicine, and that's Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism. And here you see a portrait of Confucius, who lived at this time. And very simply, Confucian philosophy provided very broad models for self-cultivation and social development. There was a strict order in the hierarchy, great importance on, how hierarchy governed social relationships, and emphasis on order. And this became very important in terms of governing huge area of land. You need a strong leadership, a strong centralized bureaucracy, pardon me. In the Zhou Dynasty also, Taoism came into force. It was developed, and here there is a photo or a portrait of Lao Tzu, who was the philosopher to whom Taoism is attributed. He was a philosopher, a teacher, and here you see him wandering around, spreading his teaching. And the famous book, well, Taoism, anyway, this is the famous book that was attributed to Lao Tzu, Tao Te Ching. Tao is way, Ching is classic, classic of the way, and its power is how it's translated here. And Tao Te Ching presents a concept that is really difficult to grasp, not just for us non-Chinese, but also for Chinese people. And it contains a philosophical system that grows from 2 very indigenous Chinese principles. One is Wu Wei, which is action of no action, very contradictory. And also Yin and Yang, which I will go into in a short while. But Taoism emphasizes the great way of nature, living in harmony with nature, harmonizing human action and human consciousness with the great Tao of nature. At this time, there was a shift away from disease being something that was caused by ancestors who cursed you, to a belief in diseases being caused by demons. And the cure is to get help from shamans. And here you see some statues of shamans doing special movements. Of course, the shamans kept their skills secret because it was very competitive. It's a very powerful position to be considered to be in if you're a shaman. But they had different methods of combating demons, oral spells, special movements, like I said, magical weapons, rituals for specific days and times of the year, for example. I'm just going to stop quickly and ask if there are any questions, because I'm in between dynasties and it's a good time to stop. Is there?
Okay. If anybody has a question, just at this stage, I think just press the mute, press your space bar to unmute yourself, or the. No.
No. Oh, pardon me.
No questions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hopefully, I'm still holding attention then.
Well, we still have 45 participants, so.
Okay, great. Okay, so we're getting to the exciting bit, which is the Qin Dynasty. Very short-lived, as you could see. It was only 15 years that it lasted in power, but it was a very powerful time. For such a short-lived dynasty, it had the most lasting legacy and impact. I'm showing here the terracotta army in Xi'an, which is the burial ground of the emperor from the Qin Dynasty. He was called Qin Shi Huangdi, Huangdi, Yellow Emperor. This was the start of imperial China. So what the Emperor Qin, what he was able to do was he established a unified state under a centralized leadership. Prior to that, everybody was at war with each other. And there were lots of accomplishments at this time. Great Wall of China, not that it was built during this time, but the different parts of the Great Wall were linked together to make up the Great Wall. There were also lots of very important achievements, like the standardization of in the fields of law, in economic and financial exchange. The language was reformed, and weights and measures were standardized. And the result was a period of very productive and prosperous times following the Qin Dynasty. Writing reform, I show this because up on top you see the old style writing, and of course it's not as simple as it was this and it became this. There were many different stages, but what we see at the bottom is what you will find in China and Taiwan and other countries with Chinese populations. I show this quickly because it's a very, very good movie from 2002 called Hero. And it's just a story of an assassin, the guy in black, Jet Li, who was sent to assassinate the person who was yet to be emperor of the Qin Dynasty. Watch it if you can. After the after the Qins, Han Dynasty, which was the first durable state that governed the Chinese heartland, the vast swathe of land. This was the first golden age of China, and it officially became a Confucian state under Emperor Wu. So I show this portrait of Confucius again. And Confucianism became the dominant state philosophy until 1911 with the last empire of China when it finished. And Confucianism, as I said before, provided the bureaucratic underpinnings that you needed to run a centralized empire. What we know about this time, we know from, I'll go back a minute, because one of the things that the Qin Emperor did was he burned a lot of books, he burned a lot of literature. So there was quite a dearth of information about this time, except there was a burial site called Mawangdui burial site that was excavated between 1972 and 1974 in Changsha. And it was a tomb of Chancellor, his wife, and I believe their son. And there were so many different artifacts and works of literature that were covered. It's the oldest immediate source of literature regarding not just Chinese medicine, but a great variety of subjects so far discovered by archaeologists. What you see on the screen is a silk painting showing figures doing various forms of exercises called Dao Yin. This is the precursor of Tai Chi and Qigong. And I'd like to take this opportunity, we're 30 minutes into the talk, and I'd like to take an opportunity to stop for a Qigong break, give you a flavor what that's like. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I'm going to invite everyone, if you'd like, you could stay seated as well if you'd like, but if you'd like to get up on your feet, and you can't see my bottom half, or you can go to the loo if you need a loo break. But let's just stand here. I'm going to take a few minutes and just do some breathing exercises. So we'd like our feet to be what we call shoulder width. So the distance between the outsides of your feet to be the same distance between your shoulders. And looking straight ahead, we want straightness in the body, of course. It's as if the top of your head is attracted to the heavens above. Knees slightly bent. You're not rigid, you're nice and soft. And let's just put our consciousness away from the chatter in the head to the area below our belly, the dantian, which is the physical center of our gravity, but it's also very important in Chinese medicine. It's the center, our energetic center. And so you could put your hand on your belly if you like. And so we're just going to breathe deeply. Most of us breathe only using this part of our lungs. But really effective and meaningful breathing, we're using our diaphragm. And so we are breathing in, letting the diaphragm expand. And breathing out, letting the diaphragm contract. And so using up the entire lungs, the upper lobe and the lower lobe. And we'll just stay here a few moments. Just focus on the breath. So it's a lot like yoga, a lot like maybe it's in mindfulness, this is also used, of course, but really just using the moment to stop what we're doing, getting away from the mental chatter, and just focusing on the breath. Quieting the minds. Just looking straight ahead with the eyes half open, half closed. And you can be aware of everything going on around you, but being very soft. And when we're ready, just let the hands relax to the side. And on the inhalation, let the wrists be drawn up and out, stopping at shoulder height. Elbows can then grow heavy as we exhale, and the hands go towards the shoulders. And then they come down in front of the body, resting momentarily, and then relaxing. So inhaling, arms are drawn up, fingertips follow. Exhaling, elbow grows heavy, hands come down in front of the body. And the timing is with your breath. Inhaling, exhaling. So we're taking long, smooth breaths, unrushed. And what we're doing is we're circulating energy. It's called the Yin Yang Breath. The Yang energy coming up to the top of the head, through the spine, top of the head. Yin energy coming down the center of the body, down, and then goes around again and starts at the base of the spine. So it's just breathing and circulating vital energy. Let's do it 3 more times. Well done. Thank you to everyone who maybe tried something different this morning. I'm going to share my screen again. Okay, so let's go back to the Han Dynasty, the very famous book, Wang Jing. And this is the time when, again, there was a shift in Chinese medicine where a system of thinking called systematic correspondence, which I'll go into, developed and is still recognized in Chinese medicine today. So this book was not done by one person. It was compiled during this time. It was the work of many different doctors, added to, compiled by. And Wang Jing defined disease, but more importantly, I think, it contained a very comprehensive definition of health, very much focusing on not just the physical body, but on the emotional, spiritual, psychological, philosophical aspects of disease and well-being. This is a passage from chapter 3 of the book. And for me, the important thing about the book, or well, just one of the wonderful things about Chinese medicine, is the emphasis on preventative medicine. So it's all about treating patients before they could get sick. The ancient sages, they thought treating people when they're already sick is a bit like soldiers just starting to forge their weapons or sharpen their weapons while there's already a battle in place. It's a bit too late. At this time, the knowledge of acupuncture, the use of needles, the different points on the channel system, it appeared during this time, 2nd century BC. And in fact, we could say that a traditional acupuncturist, if they're practicing true traditional acupuncture, would be able to trace the theory or their style back to this book, back to the Yellow Emperor. The first acupuncture needles were made of stone, but afterwards, when the technology for metal became developed, then we started having metal needles. So I'm showing this sample of systematic correspondence. When I said earlier, this developed during the Han Dynasty, and it was very much about looking at the natural world and seeing the human body as just a microcosm of what's going on out there. So the ancient Chinese, they made the connections and the correspondence between seasons. And so fire is summer in red, earth is late summer when you harvest, followed by metal, which is autumn, onto winter, which is water, and then wood, which is spring. And there are internal organs that are associated with those elements and seasons. I won't go into this in detail, but I'll also show you a more developed table of correspondence. And again, it's about the relationship of humans to the natural world. It's very detailed, but I'm just going to show you. So the different elements, wood, fire, soil, metal, water, had different seasons or climatic conditions associated with them, smells, emotions. I already talked about internal organs. So as an example, and I highlight in yellow, if someone were to come to me in clinic and said, oh, hi Tess, I have terrible migraines and it's just behind my eyes, that's where it's worst, and I get very angry and shouty and I'm so irritable, I would immediately think of the Chinese liver, because of all the different things that I'm noticing about this person and what this person is telling me. It's more complicated than that. That's very, very simple. But just to show you, give you a flavor of how what was developed during the Han Dynasty very much still applies to what we do in clinic today. I'm going to move on to something very important, Qigong, which is what we were doing earlier. And I won't go into too much detail, but just to say that this is central. During the Han Dynasty, the concept of demons causing diseases, we have now another shift where we talk about the concept of qi and health being a state of health, being when you have harmonious circulation of qi or vital energy around the body. And disease would be the opposite of that, which is the blockage or the unnatural movement of qi. Qi is one of these strange words where it has literally 100 meanings. But in Chinese medicine, a rough translation would be vital energy. So when a Chinese medicine doctor looks at a patient, there's only really just one thing that they're thinking of. Well, not just one thing, but the first and foremost thing they're thinking of is this body's qi circulating harmoniously in this person's body, mind, and whole life? We can write books about this subject. I'm going to skip this because it's very esoteric about the Chinese character and how we derive the meaning, but I'll skip that for now. This is another symbol that I'd like to talk a bit about, Yin Yang, which I'm sure we've all seen. Everything in the universe, and this is straight out of Taoism. Yin Yang, most people think of it as opposites, but it's not just opposites. It describes relationships with each other. Original meaning of this is yin is the dark bit, which originally meant the dark side of a hill. The yang is the white, the sunny, it literally meant sunny side of the hill. And yin and yang describes relationships. It describes all the natural phenomenon in the world. So in terms of seasons, yang is very summer, height of summer, which flows into autumn, which goes into winter. And, you know, all the natural cycles in terms of human beings, the very bottom, where yang starts, would be birth, and then a person matures, goes through puberty, and they reach in their late 20s, early 30s, the most active time of their lives, and then slowly going into the yin part when you go through middle age, and then retirement and so forth when you're at your most quiet. So yin yang, very, very, and in Chinese medicine, everything is about this interplay between yin and yang. I really won't go into too much detail. because I need to jump to the Tang Dynasty, because after the Han Dynasty collapsed, there followed 4 centuries of division. And the Tang Dynasty, what followed after that, was the second highest point in Chinese culture after Han. Silk Road had been opened, which is why I show this, this map. And you had different practices and philosophies and foreign influences coming from not just India, but Middle Asia, Central Asia, all flowing in and out of China. So this was a very cosmopolitan time. And foreigners brought philosophies and healing practices, especially related to Buddhism during this time. A very important figure during this time was Simiao. He lived and worked at this time. He was born in 581, and he was considered the father of herbal medicine. So here you see him looking at plants and tasting and discovering what the effects are of different herbs. He was just one of these giants in Chinese medicine. He paid special attention to pediatrics and gynecology. I like a story about him, which is that he had an immortal herb dog because he had a faithful companion dog who followed him in all of his travels, looking for herbs and plants and all that. And he used to feed his dog with the herbs that he sampled, and the dog became so healthy that it became immortal. Again, one of these lovely myth stories. For me, Sun Simiao was very important because he promoted good health and hygiene. And these are really important points in Chinese medicine. We go back to preventative health, preventative practices. Another statue of Sun Simiao. And then we move on to Song Dynasty, 960 to 1279. It was a weaker dynasty than the Tang Empire, but it was also a high point in Chinese classical culture. So there was lots of development in technology, in arts, in agriculture. This was the time of the invention of the printing with movable type, and that meant you could publish lots of books, therefore encouraging debate. This is a time when the gunpowder and the compass were developed, were invented, and medicine became specialized. So you had doctors specializing in pediatrics or childhood illnesses, for example. This photo is, I just chanced upon this brass model when I was in a museum in Beijing. And there was a chap, Wang Weiyi, who devised this way of examining students who were going through the Imperial Medical Academy exams. And the model contained acupuncture points, but it was devised in such a way that when students picked the right point and needled it, water would come out of the brass model. I think they used beeswax or something like that. But it was certainly different in my time when we were taking our acupuncture point exams. Moving on to Ming Dynasty. This was a time when, changes to the imperial examinations. So there was much less emphasis on how much literary knowledge you had and much more on practical abilities. So it was easier for people from all walks of life to become Chinese medicine practitioners, for example. So you had a cross-filtering of ideas from upper strata society to lower classes, vice versa. This was a time when there were different medical schools of thought developing. So all really important, exciting developments. This chap, Wang Ching Ren, he was famous for, he lived from 1768 to 1831, and he attempted autopsies. This was very much culturally frowned on in China. You're not meant to mess around with dead bodies. But he got around this rule by studying plague victims. How about that? And also a time when publications of books, herbal books especially, meant that Chinese medicine spread, especially to countries in East Asia. So nowadays, if you were to go to Korea, Vietnam, Tibet, Japan, they have their own kind of Oriental medicine with its roots in Chinese medicine, but they all have their national flavor, as it were. And we gallop on to the 20th century, and here is a photo of the last emperor, Puyi. The last dynasty was called Qing, Qing, Qing Dynasty. And Puyi was the last emperor. He was basically held captive by the Japanese army. This period was very much a period of instability. The government was corrupt. And because it was so weak, that the military forces and economic forces of Western countries and Japan meant that they put lots of pressure on the government. Anyway, government collapsed, or the dynasty finished. I'm going to show you this famous, it was a great movie from 1987, The Last Emperor by Bertolucci, and showing the last emperor leaving with his wives and concubines. And at this time, communists came to power in 1949. Desperate times, the country was terribly poor and ravaged by war, and people needed healthcare, cheap healthcare. So the communist government started Chinese medicine universities, standardized the teaching of Chinese medicine. Prior to that, it was very much something that was handed down families or apprentices. So from a medical doctor, Chinese medical doctor, to an apprentice who apprenticed for years and years and years until they, became their own doctor in their own right. So we came from that to standardized Chinese medicine curriculum. And the 4 universities were in Beijing, Chengdu, Guangzhou, and Shanghai. And then the doctors who graduated were sent out to the countryside, where they taught what they called Barefoot Doctors. So these were ordinary people. They taught them very basic medicine, who then delivered very basic healthcare to zillions of Chinese people who needed this cheap medical care, effective, cheap medical care. Now, I'm showing, this is my last slide. I'm showing this because Dr. Wang Juyi, is someone whose teachings I follow with what I do, with the classical acupuncture that I practice. He very much exemplified the doctors who were trained after the communists came to power. In fact, he graduated with the first graduating class in Beijing University. And this was his class of Barefoot Doctors, because like all the doctors at that time, he was sent out. And this was, I can't even identify him, but I know he's in this photo somewhere. And we come to present day China, when Chinese medicine has spread around the world, especially in the 70s and 80s when it started. There's a real move to going back to the classics. So that's very much what Dr. Wang emphasized, going back to the Wang Di Neijing. And now with modern technology, we can use modern imaging, for example, to find out exactly how does acupuncture work? Where are the channels? So we know, for example, that what we call acupuncture points or channels exist on the connective tissues or fascia that connects all of the organs, all the muscles, all the tendons, and it's wrapped around all of these different pieces of our body all throughout. We know that from modern technology. So it's almost 12 o'clock. I hope what I have given you in this very much whistle-stop tour of history of Chinese medicine is an idea of the richness of this medicine and just a starting point for exploring further if you were interested. As I said, I've got 3 pages here. If you're interested, just do ask Carl or Sally. I'm sure they'll make it available for downloading. And lastly, I just have a few books of recommended reading, excellent books for a layperson, including this one, Live Well, Live Long. I'm not plugging, Peter Deadman is not paying me. I just think this is such a beautiful book. New book, came out in 2016, and it's about this tradition of cultivating health. And with that, I say thank you very much for your time this morning and for doing some Qigong exercises with me.